Pickett's district. We don't know why, we don't know who he is or what's going on, but at the same time, Joe Pickett is working with, for the first time, a female game warden in the next district named Caitlin Hand. And they're trying to chase down, they're trying to figure out who the pilot is of a drone that's been running wildlife off winter ranges and stressing them and killing them. It's kind of based on something that really happened in Wyoming a couple of years ago. So between the two, the target that Caitlin and Joe are after, and of course the target that the Wolfpack is after, it's probably going to be the same person, and they will eventually intersect.
It's really scary. There was an article in, I can't remember, it was the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times recently, about anti-drone weaponry or ways to deal with drones. They really can be very dangerous.
They can be, but of course for my purposes, Nate Romanowski has Falcons. And he's working with them on a special project.
So if we have, like, you know, the U.S. Marshals and the Game Warden Service and all, we always have a loose cannon in Nate Romanowski, right? Those of you, are all of you up to speed with the whole series? You know, everybody here knows who Nate Romanowski is.
Thank you.
I don't want to assume that there are no, like, first readers here, but Nate is one of the things I think that people bond with the most, because Joe is you know, in his own way kind of a by the rules guy, even though he gets pushed out of them sometimes. But Nate has never been.
Never. Although things are changing, that's one thing. This is the 19th book, which amazes me when I think about that, because I never thought there would be a book
Isn't
two.
that the truth? I pulled your first book off the shelf recently, open season, and I was telling CJ, over Manhattan's, last week he said something else, that it came to me with a note from his then editor, who's since retired, and it said, "Barbara, pay attention, he's going to be big." Well, you know, it was his first book, and we had, I don't remember, you know, modest number of people, and I mean, that's how it always goes with first books, with fairly few
10 people,
I don't know.
5 of which were relatives.
Don Winslow pointed out that in his first event at the store, it was me and another employee, and we sold 3 books, and I bought one of them. So, here's the thing, you know, you have to have faith. Patrick and I, as booksellers, we have to have faith that that we should host an author, and the author may turn out to be wonderful or may not necessarily become a huge success. But if we love the book, regardless of what the sales might turn out to be or the trajectory of the author's career has to be, we have to be there, right? It doesn't always turn into CJ, who's a #1 bestseller and all the rest of it, but we'll never be there if we don't have that faith at the beginning, right?
That's right, and if you haven't been to the Poison Pen, I mean, it is an iconic store for the entire country. And Barbara runs such a great operation, such great staff. I'm not saying this because of the Manhattans. It's true because I on the tours I get to travel around the U.S. and it's just always a treat. Now I'm starting the publication day, first day of the tour here, and always happy to be here.
Well, actually, the publication date's tomorrow, so you guys are really fortunate that you get to be here the night before. But I would like to say that while the Poison Pen was originally me, I was the only employee for 2.5 years, and now I actually have very little to do with it anymore. It's really about the incredible staff that we have, and I'm so grateful for them, and I appreciate you all working with them and enjoying them, because without them, it would just all fall apart. There's no way I could run it by myself today, is there? No. So, by the way, the photos behind are a trip that my husband and I made to Wyoming last year in May to see CJ. So you might have noticed, did any of you notice the tornadoes? Yeah. The 2 tornadoes? We were standing on the balcony of CJ's house looking out at the snowy mountains when that tornado descended.
Which is very rare, strange. We get a few of them, but that was amazing.
Saratoga, Wyoming, looking over there at the snowy mountains. Right, no, it is. It's in Yellowstone. Those of you who've read CJ's book about Yellowstone, remind us
Free
about-
fire.
Right. What was the jurisdictional interest in that book was astonishing about Yellowstone, which I'm not sure many people knew about.
I don't think so. I had been at that point, I think I've been to Yellowstone Park 150 times. And the reason is because before the books took off, and even when they first started getting published, I was in the Wyoming tourism industry. And so I would host tours of journalists and tour operators from around the world in Yellowstone Park. So I just go there all the time. And I always thought there would be a fascinating story of Yellowstone from the inside out, not necessarily what tourists saw when they drive the figure 8 road system, but the park people who lived there all year, the conflicts between the Park Service and the concessionaires, and all of the really, everything in that book, except for one thing I invented, is true when it came to those who have read it about the bacteria and the strange things that they harvest there from the hot pools. And I wanted to put it in a book, and it's still one of my favorites.
But there was also a jurisdictional issue in that book.
Right.
Which I thought was the crux of the mystery plot.
Right, conceivably there is a place where you can get away with murder in the United States, and that's the little 50-square mile section of Yellowstone that's also in the state of Idaho. And it's a constitutional reason why you have to draw a jury from the state and district where a crime is committed, and that would be the state of Idaho. The district is Wyoming, strangely enough, and there are no residents, so you couldn't put together a jury trial. So for years when I'd go around talking about that book, I'd say, all you people who are thinking about taking your mother-in-law to Yellowstone, you can't take somebody there and kill them. It has to be something that would organically happen in this 50-square mile area in a way, under strange circumstances. And that law has been tested once by an elk poacher. Yep, who said, I want a jury trial here where I committed the crime. And they eventually just dismissed the case.
So, I can't see them, but you've seen there's several pictures of buffalo, right? Did you notice the tree that has the bark all cut off? There's a tree with a wound. Did you see that picture? So, I think I put it in there. So, Rob and I are driving through the park and we're seeing almost all the trees along the roads have these enormous wounds in them where the bark is all cut out. And we're thinking, beetle infestation, what could it be? So I said to Rob, fear not, because when we get to CJ's, we'll get the answer to this. So I asked him, what's the thing with the trees? And you said...
That's where the bears, it the bears?
It's the buffalo.
Bears and buffalo.
Bears too?
Bears claw it and buffalo rub against it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember the buffalo because what we were so surprised about was the number of buffalo sauntering down the highways in Yellowstone. I mean, there's, I think, a photo of one coming right up to the car, and my children said to me, Mom, it's dangerous. Why are you photographing this buffalo right there? I said, because it walked up to the car. We didn't know what else to do. But the reason that they are doing that is because they have learned that the snowplows clear the roads. And therefore, in the winter, it's easier to navigate Yellowstone if you're a buffalo by walking down the roads than walking around the park. But they also do that in the summer. So everywhere you go, there is the expectation that some buffalo is going to come up, and they can really kill you, can't they?
Yeah, they're big, and they can sprint 40 miles an hour, and they're very fast and very heavy. And one of the things we were talking about, there were 3 Asian tourists last year in Yellowstone Park who were killed trying to do selfies with buffalo. Because of course they have their back to the buffalo when they're taking the picture, and the picture is as if the buffalo just about to hit them, but they don't know it. And 3 of them last year, 3 deaths.
I pointed that out to CJ. You read about the woman today here or yesterday who decided to take a selfie with the jaguar, and I thought, I'm sorry it didn't kill her because she really shouldn't be in the gene pool at this point. There's a thing. I I don't really mean that, but there is an annual award called the Darwin Award, which I am really in favor of, which basically says it's cleaning the gene pool of people who are so dumb that they shouldn't propagate. And I thought, okay, we're going to do it. Sorry, please don't, criticize us on Yelp for my terrible attitude here. But honestly, I do think it's important that people remember that animals, wild, are dangerous, and you can't just treat them like some Disney cartoon figure that you can go out and part of Joe's mission is to always remind people and keep them safe that these animals are in fact dangerous, but he's also there to protect the animals, right?
Right, and that's part of every game warden's job. In this book in particular, which actually corresponds with things that are happening now too, there are wolves in his district. There's not supposed to be wolves there. Wolves are supposed to be hanging around Yellowstone Park and not going too far, but in fact, they've spread beyond Yellowstone into southern Wyoming. Near where I live, we saw a pack this winter into Colorado. The wolves are like grizzlies in that they range much farther than biologists ever thought they did. So they're everywhere, and wolves are wolves.
Isn't the gray wolf coming off the endangered species list? I thought I read that.
Yeah, and that's controversial too. I won't get into that too much because actually the wolves that were reintroduced into Yellowstone, that particular species was never in Yellowstone in the first place, but they were the easiest wolves to get and put there. So that's a controversy in itself.
So Nate and his falcons. Are they native to Yellowstone?
All of those falcons
Wyoming?
are that he's got. Yeah, they're all from they're all native to Wyoming. In this book, couple different things are happening, and because I really sat down when this book started, I thought it's time to really shake things up in this series, and there's going to be people who you've come to know and love that aren't going to make it through this one, and there's also. The relationship between Joe and Nate are kind of changing because Nate's getting domesticated, and Joe's and his wife are facing an empty nest for the first time.
And a daughter who is dating, who may be unwisely dating, dangerous dating.
Right. So a lot of things are changing, and there's a big reckoning in the end. But as for Nate, yeah, he's gone legit, or as much as he can. Of course, he comes back, and he reverts back to his basic Nate, but he's still trying, and some big changes.
Falcons. Do you know that falcons play an important role here in Phoenix now? Resorts hire people who can train falcons to keep down various pests and so forth.
This is what Nate Romanowski does now.
Right.
Yeah, he's got a falconry company.
Right. They're a pest control kind of a thing. And my husband had a former employee who now is a professional falconer, and various resorts hire her in order to bring the birds there and, deal with various things. So I can see that Nate might be going mainstream, although who wants Nate to go mainstream?
Well, it's not going to last. Just as when this book begins, for the first time in Joe Pickett's, if you read the end of The Disappeared, the last scene, he's in the trooper's car headed to Cheyenne where the governor's going to fire him in person. Now the book begins, he's got his job back, he's got a nice new home, he's got a new pickup, he got a raise. All these things happen in the interim between the books, and it's all explained. But if you've read these if things are going that well for Joe Pickett, they're going to take a big turn really fast, and they do.
Yeah, you just can't be kind to him. In fact, he's got a new house because the old one was torched, right? It wasn't like it was a voluntary thing. Yeah. Governor Rulon is somewhat offstage in this, but he's the deus ex machina that gets Joe back in the job and gets him the new house. He was limited for 2 terms in Wyoming?
Right, yeah.
So now he's out of office, but can he run again?
He can after the current.
That's what I mean.
He could run a third time. But yeah, and now he's in private practice as a lawyer. and he's kind of serving as Joe's lawyer pro bono, because Rulon hates the new governor as much as Joe does.
So it's always good to have an ally,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like that. What's going on with Joe's wife? Because she's, you know, you haven't been super kind to her over the years.
Well, I mean, she's definitely the brains of that outfit. Got personal experience with that. But she's still running the library, and very involved in Joe's investigations, and also does a lot of behind-the-scenes research in this new book on things that Joe's trying to figure out. She's got access to some criminal databases and computer databases, and she's basically walking him through what he's seeing several times during the book. They're a good team.
You know, it's almost impossible today for any kind of sleuth not to have an IT or hacker expert. It used to be they had muscle. You know, Joe Cole, I mean, Elvis Cole had Joe Pike, and whoever it was, Patrick, and the Dennis Lahane books had Bubba, remember, and Robert Parker Spencer has Hawk. But you don't need muscle so much today as you need a hacker.
Right.
Or some computer genius.
You need data and access, right?
Yeah.
Which is, you know, I do try to. It's fun to always juxtapose technology into these books that are very much outdoor books, because it's true, you can't avoid it. But there's one of the, I don't know if it's a great thing. It's a great thing for a writer, is the fact that so much of Joe Pickett's life is spent in places he can't get a cell signal, which means not every single thing he's doing or can possibly do, he can check on things and track it. And that's true. You know, there's still a lot.
But lucky for you, too.
Yeah.
It is
It
a
is.
real pain to the artificial ways that writers have to deal with technology.
Mhm.
Can be. I was fascinated with the woman game warden, because we actually see her before we see Joe
Right.
in this book. She's an adjacent area.
Right.
Right,
Right.
so
Over
she
the
and
other side of
Joe,
the big
they
ones.
overlap somewhere in the mountains where the drone is flying, right?
Right. Well, when she sees the drone chasing the wildlife, the last she sees of it, it's headed over to Joe Pickett's district.
Right.
So
So we're in a different place than Joe, but why did you decide to include another warden, and that warden being female?
I got very interested. Actually, that was suggested to me by a real game warden in Wyoming. He said, "You realize that there's only 50, like I always say, and 3 of them in Wyoming are women." And it turns out that one of the most senior of the game warden lived about 80 miles from where I live. So I went over the top of the mountain and talked to her and went on a ride along with her last year. And it was fascinating to get her perspective on the same duties that Joe Pickett has. And of course, you know, I mean, she's very professional, very good, really well respected in her area, but she does have a few different kinds of things.
Well,
You know,
like what?
well, a woman walking into an all-male elk camp where they're all drunk has to approach it differently than a man. You know, who might be kind of glad-handy and patting everybody on the back. She's got to approach it differently. I did ask. I said, what would surprise me the most? What's the toughest thing about being a woman game warden out here in the field? And she said, where to go to the bathroom. Something I never would have thought.
You know, you wouldn't, because men are engineered for outdoor.
That's right.
But women really are not, you know? It's just, I've never met a woman who really wanted to piss off a bridge, and virtually every man is happy to do that. It's just, seriously, you know. I'm glad she brought that to your attention.
The other thing she brought up was there's something within the game warden community in Wyoming is they have an annual convention, and they all the highlight of this convention is kind of dumb, but is photos of game wardens stuck, you know, in horrible situations, and none of these game wardens ever want to be featured in this slideshow. And when I was out with her, we got stuck. And the last thing she wanted to do was call anybody from town to come tow her out and take a picture of her and send it on. So we winched her truck out, and I actually used this whole thing in the book. And she confessed that that's, do not take your phone out. Do not take a phone out. And I didn't.
What kind of family dynamic would a woman game warden have as compared to Joe and his family dynamic? Would there be any intrinsic differences?
I fictionalized it somewhat in this book, but there's kind of an issue where the woman in the case of the female game wardens that I've met are the main breadwinner of the family.
Yeah.
And that creates its own kind of dynamics, especially in a very small community where maybe the man is trained to do certain kind of job that doesn't exist in this tiny little place. And so I kind of created that dynamic in this book. I don't know if it's accurate to the particular female game warden, but it works in reverse with game wardens a lot, where these guys are state employees. They don't make a lot of money. Their wives are often very well trained in different kind of specialty fields that they can't get a job because they're in the middle of nowhere. So that creates its own kind of thing, just kind of like the Joe and Mary Beth thing.
Well, it is. Now, Wyoming, remind me, it's very thinly populated.
600,000 people and dropping.
So Scottsdale soon will equal Wyoming, right, the way it's going. So it's a huge amount of territory to cover with possibly more animals than people.
Well, I've heard there's more pronghorn antelope alone than people. Yeah.
So lots of driving, lots of distance.
Lots of windshield time. Yes. But at the same time, everybody tends to know each other. It's one of those states where I always say that there's still just 1 degree of separation. If you don't know somebody in this other community, you know somebody who knows that person. So it's very, very connected.
What's the other law enforcement besides game wardens? What other law enforcement? Do we have like state troopers? You're going to have local police chiefs, right? Because that's how it works out. Do you have sheriffs for the counties?
Well, and
that's sort of
there's a big layer on top of that, and it would be the same thing in Arizona, like the entire West, and that is with so much public land, you not only have local, county, state law enforcement, you have so many different federal law enforcement and bureaucracies, and FBI is in charge of the Indian reservations, and they do just tend to tumble all over each other.
So you can always have interagency squabbles as part of the conflict in any of your books.
Right, it's very accurate too.
So in this book, without giving away what that is, but there is a major interagency clash in Wolfpack that's very important for the way the plot goes. Tell me something about the whole conduit for. Were any of you here for Don Winslow when he talked about the border a couple weeks ago? He has a very different take on the war on drugs than the more popular take. And this book has obviously a lot to do also with the war on drugs and a conduit. How do you see it working if Wyoming, with its thin population, is an outlet for the cartels?
Well,
or is it?
It is to some degree, just like a few years ago when we were talking about meth that's in every rural community in the West and Midwest. The fentanyl opiate addiction problem reaches into every little community no matter where it is. And in this case, there is a connection to that because of the mystery man. And so I got to write about that a little bit, and that's the reason, the wolf pack, the two-legged wolf pack people are going to Wyoming.
Yeah, it's really scary.
Without giving away too much, obscure as possible.
So, without being political here, and I really don't want to be, do you see that an actual wall would be a deterrent to what you've written about in the Wolfpack, or would it just be a barrier they can bypass?
I don't see them even related. I don't think that would make much difference. I mean, the ways that fentanyl flow into the United States, the biggest distributor, the biggest method of delivering fentanyl into the United States is through the U.S. mail. And occasionally they're caught, or like it'll be in a car or a truck, but most of it comes through the mail.
In point of fact, it was, I think today, it was, is that you, Robert, up there? Oh, good. I think it was like umpteen pounds of fentanyl in a cucumber truck, so, you know, it's kind of luck if you actually stop one.
But the number of people that a simple, like a half a pound can kill is unbelievable. Millions of people.
Yes, I know.
It's that strong.
I think Don's figures, I might have these wrong, were something like the United States has 15% of the world's population and 80% of the world's dope consumption, you know, opioid, and that's a really terrible thing, you know, to think about that. So I'm not surprised that you didn't want to use that as part of the engine for the plot in this book, was that even if Wyoming is kind of in the middle and not heavily populated, it's still a market.
Sure it is, and a conduit. You know, the way I construct every book, and I've done this from the very first one without, you know, I kind of had to look back on it to figure out I usually take 2 or 3 major plot points or themes or issues that I'm really interested in, and I do the research on those, and then often they have no relation to each other. But what I try to do is figure out ways to link them. In this case, it's drones, the use of drones of wildlife, a female game warden, which I wanted to write about, the fentanyl opioid deal, and federal programs like the Witness Protection Program that are well-intentioned but sometimes go awry on the ground. How do I link these things? And then I try to figure out, once I do, how can I pull a reader through these 3 strange things in a page-turning way? And that's how the plots get made.
You sure fooled me on the last one. How many of you read the last book? Did most of you read it? Did you, we're not going to reveal what it was, but did you expect that the body disposal would be the bodies that, no. You know, I mean, I think I put a couple of pictures up there of the windmills in Wyoming that we went by on the way to visit CJ. I thought you did a masterful job pulling the wool over our eyes.
Good, thank you.
In that book.
Thanks very much.
You know, you're very clever. I would also like to thank you in this book for sending Joe's mother-in-law on a cruise. I was really... She would have been like one element too many in an already complicated story.
Because she's not in every book. She just when she appears and wreaks havoc and then disappears for a while.
The Windmill book.
You know she'll be back at some point.
Yes, I know. The Windmill book was her finest moment. Right. So there we are. So we are fortunate tonight, Robert, wander on down here, that we have with us tonight Robert Anglen, the investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic, who tomorrow is, yay, Robert, who was a resource for CJ on this book. I'm going to cede my microphone to him, Robert. And additionally has an amazing series starting tomorrow in the Republic about the mafia here in Phoenix. Wednesday, sorry, you said tomorrow. Wednesday, that ties into this book. So because they did a lot of work on this book together, I thought that you would enjoy hearing Robert and CJ.
Thank you.
Good to see you, man.
You too. Sorry for wandering in late.
Not a problem.
The mafia kept me busy. This wasn't, she said I helped work on the book. No. CJ called, asked questions, I answered, and he had a pretty good reporter hat on.
Well, a few years ago, I think it was probably more than 3 years ago, during one of these events, we were driving around, and you were telling me about the work you were doing on the guy who was in the Witness Protection Program, you thought at that time,
Right.
who was doing all sorts of bad things in Arizona, and I got fascinated with that story about, like I said, the well-intentioned federal program where you take a horrible criminal and put him somewhere else and don't tell anybody who he is, and what do you know? He acts like a criminal. But the feds won't admit that he's there, and they won't really help, and it's a danger to the community if the guy's awful. And I thought, what an interesting take on that whole thing. So, and Robert was instrumental in helping me kind of figure that out. I took a lot more notes than I was able to use, just like always, but that was the impetus for that, was that series you did.
And not only that, it's not only that they won't tell, it's actually illegal for them to talk about the guy. Here, they won't even tell. The highest ranking officer, law enforcement officer in Arizona is a U.S. attorney. He doesn't know when these people are coming to Arizona. And in this case, it was a former mob hitter or a former mob soldier who got into restaurant development, for want of a better term. He unloaded on these restaurants, pulled them apart piece by piece. They were tied to Toby Keith, the country singer. And I think it was like $65 million in lawsuits across the country. He's still going on, and I'll have a part 2 coming out Wednesday.
Really?
Oh yeah. And
It's the same guy?
Yeah, and it's in a lot of ways, it's a lot more revealing than the first series.
Well, I read every bit of the last one, and the way that you guys do that online, it is so well done. So, I used to be a little small-time reporter, so I really admire real ones.
I admire real writers.
That's very interesting. Of course, part of the issue I had with using that in a Joe Pickett series is, you know, a lot of people in the witness protection program and they're usually from the East Coast, and they wind up in places like nice warm places like Arizona. Why would any guy ever want to go to Wyoming in the snow? So I had to explain why this character chose that, as he likes Western movies, you know, but yeah, and of course that kind of gives away why the wolf pack first comes to Scottsdale. So.
You know, one of the things I liked a lot about this book, well, you were talking to Barbara about the sort of ideas that you get, but you missed the GPS thing, which I was on board with that the whole way. That was fun.
Oh, good.
There's a great side plot to this book involving GPS.
It's absolutely true.
And I thought you used it well.
Thank you.
Talk about, how did you stumble on that?
It was just, it came as part of the plot, because I had to sense some misdirection in there. And I started to do some research, and I found out there are firms that exist. For example, if you open up a pizza place and somebody puts in the address and it doesn't show up on the GPS, there's firms you can hire that will go to all of the search engine or telephone company firms, because they all do their own GPS software, and say, please add this pizza place. So it's all done independently. You think it's all big, one huge database. It's not. It's very disparate and very complicated. And if someone deliberately took a place out, it would not exist on a GPS.
So when you called the Marshal Service, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the FBI to ask, hey, do you do that? How did they respond? I
didn't call them, but I did find some deep dive investigative pieces about that.
No, it's a fascinating little topic.
Thanks.
It's just kind of interwoven with the wolf pack.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah, and there is a real wolf pack in this book too. I mean, real wolves as opposed to the two-legged kind.
Actually, that's one of my favorite scenes in this book. Is I think it's about midway through. Joe Pickett is on a mountain. He's driving, and it's everything I like about the Joe Pickett books. I don't really have a question here, but you put him on top of this mountain. He's watching the wolf pack hunt.
Oh yeah.
And at the same time, he's approached by a couple of ne'er-do-wells, and he just handles it in such a Joe Pickett way. And it's not a Jack Reacher way.
No.
But it's a Joe Pickett way. And it just, everything in the scene is everything I like about your books.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
And then the wolves are beautiful.
Thank you. The wolves, I mean, they're very controversial. We were talking a little bit before you came in that, they're very controversial in Wyoming because they killed, they almost decimated the moose herds. Because what wolves are able to do on deep snow with big pads like dogs have, they're able to run along the top of the snow where the moose are going, like this, deep into it, so that they can actually attack a moose almost level with them and open them up. That's what they do. They open them up and they start pulling their guts out. And there's areas that used to have a lot of moose that had moose hunting that no longer have moose. So there's no perfect good way. There's always nuances to every well-meaning thing. I was certainly in favor of a reintroduction into wolves, although I was more in favor of them reintroducing themselves than having the federal government put in wolves that were never there in the first place, for a lot of photo ops, because they were reintroducing themselves. But now they've gone way beyond in numbers and in territory than they ever thought.
And yet, in the book, you paint a very sympathetic portrait of the wolf.
Well, I mean, wolves are wolves. They do what they do. They're not, diabolical. They're not saying we're going to take over territory. They do what they do.
And you're convinced from your own research that the wolves they're ranging a lot farther than anybody anticipated.
We've seen them where I live in southern Wyoming, which is 8 hours from Yellowstone Park, and they're not supposed to be there. They're there. We know.
Who says they're not supposed to be there?
The federal wildlife officials.
Kind of a witness protection program for wolves.
It is. We just deny that they're there. That's good.
So what was the most fun part about this particular book?
I didn't do it intentionally. Necessarily, I didn't sit down and say, okay, I want this is what I want to do. But the way it turned out, the three most important people, characters in this book, are all women. Caitlin Ham, the female game warden, Abriella Guzman, the head of the assassins, who's a beautiful woman who's absolutely ruthless, and then his Pickett's daughter Lucy, who is finally kind of getting her star turn in the series and comes into her own.
Which in Joe Pickett world means she's in real jeopardy.
Yes, that's right. Of course, yes. So I didn't really intend to do that, but that's how it worked out.
Well, you describe Abriella as the alpha. I mean, there's a lot of wolf overlay on this book.
Yeah.
But because I know about your research philosophies, I'm kind of interested in how much time you hung out with cartel assassins.
I spent months with him. No, it's just, I would do a lot of internet research, a lot of reading, but no, I've not hung out with them. But it is fascinating how much how their reach has gone into. Geez, I'm telling people in Arizona about cartel assassins. You've got a lot more experience with that here than I do.
I don't hang with them.
Yeah, I don't either. I just made it up. That's why what I do is easier than what you do. I just make stuff up.
Yeah. You had working from the car. I thought in this book you did a lot of things that you don't do, at least in the Joe Pickett books, which was spend a lot of time with the bad guys. You gave this crew a real personality. They're ominous, they're dangerous, they're terribly violent, but you spend a lot of time personalizing each one and their interaction with the other.
Yeah, it's because I got fascinated with them, and especially the two main ones, Abriella, the young woman who's really damaged, but also very charismatic and beautiful and ruthless, and then kind of the head of the older guy, Peter Infante, who's seeing his influence. He's the leader of the wolf pack. He's seeing his influence and leadership get supplanted by her ruthlessness, and how he deals with that. And it was just the dynamics of that was a lot of fun, and that's what I was trying to approach a book with every character. What is their motivation? Not just are they there to be in the book to advance the plot, but what is their motivation, and they just happen to be in there, if that makes any sense at all. So I had to figure out their dynamics. Otherwise, it's just for cardboard cutout people, bad guys.
I mentioned the Lucy threat. We could do some fun things in this book, and there's a couple things going in. I'm pretty sure that if you ever kill Maribeth, you're going to hear about it.
Oh, wow.
So
Yes.
there are certain people in the books you know aren't going to die.
You think. Yeah.
But you always have, there's always this threat, and you do an amazing job of having this threat without knowing that the construct can't be that Joe Pickett's going to die. But there's a lot of threat going on, and to the people he loves, and I think you do a real visceral job of
Thank you.
bringing that threat to the books.
Thank you. I think it's really important that the reader know that no one is ever safe, and that things have happened and will happen possibly to every character, because I think that ups the tension in the books and the realism to some degree. I mean, obviously, you're right. Joe Pickett, that is probably going to be around for a while, because we all have payments. We have to daughters getting married and so on. But other than that, anything can happen, and it does.
And what do you think was the hardest part about this book?
This is the strange, it's going to be a weird answer. This book fell together so easily, probably more so than any other book I've ever written. Went faster, it fit together. It's one where when I got done with it, I usually think, at the end of every book, this is the one where they're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. I really do. But this one I thought, this is really good. And that's what I told my wife, and of course she said, you rolled her eyes, but then when I sent it into the publisher, and all my first readers read it, my first readers being all three of my daughters and my wife and my agent, they all said the same thing. And when it's all women, reading this stuff, and there's so many women characters in the book, and nobody says, you got these women wrong, that's like the dog that didn't bark. You think, yes. And the reception at the publisher was the same way. So next year I'll tell you, this book sucks. I can work with it. But I really felt good about this, the way it came together.
So what is next year? What happens next with Joe?
Well, there's two things. One, there'll be a standalone with character Cassie Duell from The Highway. It's called the book's coming out in August. It's called The Bitterroots, where she's now a private detective just starting out, and she's investigating the most dysfunctional ranch family on earth in Montana. And then I'm now working on the new Joe Pickett book, which about 150 pages in. The title is Long Range. It involves long range shooting, which is a big deal now within the hunting community. I think I'll be involved in the overall arcs, but I don't think I'll be involved in the day-to-day writing of the scripts, and I don't want to be, really.
Have you done any script writing?
I did a long time ago, just to see if I could do it, but it's just, I'd rather write books.
We're glad.
Thanks. But I actually trust these people to do something, do what they're gonna, or at least try to do what they say they're gonna do.
Well, it's great to be here. We usually open it up for questions of the audience. I'm sure nobody has any questions, though, right?
There's one back there.
It's hard to see because of the lights.
You need a hat.
Oh, there you go.
If you had plans to do away with Joe's mother.
I think I kind of equate her like with coyotes and rats. And she'll be. Everybody else will die before she does. Yes.
There was a question up there. Did you have your hand up there?
Robert, there's some back there.
Go ahead.
I'd like to know what gave you, back in open season, the idea of picking a game warden as the major character.
Why a game warden? It wasn't so much. Well, first of all, I never set out to write a series. I was writing at that point. I was writing a book about. It was kind of loosely based on a real thing that happened in Wyoming with the discovery of black-footed ferrets that were thought extinct, and what really happened when the black-footed ferrets were found, and the reaction to it. And it was kind of like this, well-meaning legislation, endangered species legislation, that went awry on the ground. And I thought that was an interesting New West kind of story. And when I originally started writing it, the protagonist was a sheriff, and then that didn't work. And Then it was going to be a journalist, which is what I was doing at the time. And then, but I was going on ride-alongs with a local game warden as a journalist. And I realized that's the best conduit into this natural story. A game warden would be involved in this species, would be out there, and so that's how. And it wasn't until the publisher bought the book and said we want 2 more with Joe Pickett that I like to answer this by saying, you know, I knew that the world was waiting for a Wyoming game warden series. I was the guy who could bring it to them. But that's how it happened.
Go ahead.
Why did Nate Romanowski change out the 50 cal to the different model?
You know, well, it started with a 454 Casull, then went for a while to the what they call the Wyoming 500 Wyoming Express, which is 50 caliber. Now he's back to the 454. So mainly it's because the people who make that weapon in Freedom, Wyoming, Freedom Arms, they called me and they said, we now have a 50 caliber, you have to come over and shoot. So I did, but the 454 actually has, the real big gun enthusiasts tend to like that better. It's faster, it's got more velocity, and it's still a hand cannon. So he's kind of back to that.
What's your marksmanship skills on that?
Well, I could hit things with it. I'm a better shot than Joe Pickett is. But I also don't really enjoy shooting gigantic handguns. It's not something I don't have one, I don't want one.
No, go ahead, pump, make mine.
No, those things are something else. And when I write about those, the biggest customer for the people who make these 454 Casuls are big game hunters and the U.S. Secret Service, because it's the only handgun that can kill a car.
More questions?
Sure.
Off of Joe Pickett and then CJ, where did the storyline for 3 Weeks to Say Goodbye come from?
Oh, okay. That's one of the early standalones. That's about an open adoption gone horribly wrong. And it's really dark, twisty, dark tale. It actually that's one of my best friends growing up. Married and moved to Texas, and he and his wife did an open adoption, and a similar circumstance where the father, who had not been in the picture at all, showed up within days of when the deadline was, where they would get full parental rights, and basically started extorting them, saying, you know, you'll never get full rights to this baby unless, you know, you let me and my friends come over and hang around and drink your liquor and park in your driveway. And it was a horrible situation. And I, of course, made it worse in the book. But since I wrote that, I've heard from a lot of people who had not similar experiences with those kinds of things, with open adoption and custody agreements, and I never even knew that world was there.
Go ahead.
On the character of Nate, where did you base that character on initially? Something you read about somebody who's similar to that, or
No,
something you actually pal around with?
that's based. It is. It's based. That's a character that's based on a real person. A guy I grew up, went to high school with, and he was a year ahead of me in high school. He was the middle linebacker, long blonde hair. He was a falconer. I used to go falconry hunting with him, and he and a few of the other falconers that he was connected up with. And then he went into the military and was gone for a long time. But my friend is not as violent as Nate, but falconers have a different way of looking at the world, and that was so all the stuff. Everything I learned through falconing about falconry, I learned through him.
Are the other characters in your book based on some people as well? Or just
Almost no one else is. That's the most outlandish character in the book is the one based on a real person.
Thank you.
It's not your mother.
No, because my mother-in-law is worse than that. That's not true. I just say that for a cheap laugh. My mother-in-law's great.
Are you rounding out, Nate? You feel like you're softening, Nate?
I don't know about soft. Yes, I am. And mainly because I don't want to continue to have just a kind of standard, kick-ass guy who comes in at the end with his big guns blazing all the time. I want that character to change and arc. And he's having the same, he's kind of saying, am I getting soft? Am I getting soft? And, but I like the idea, I like the dynamic between Joe and Nate kind of changing and maturing, and I hope in a realistic way. He's still Nate, but, he's fallen in love, and other things happen in this book, and I like that, not having him just be predictable.
Questions out there? Sure.
Yeah, game wardens in Wyoming, Russ Pollard or Rod Liebert, do they recall a name?
Russ Pollard, yeah.
Russ Pollard?
Yeah, I know him.
Okay, he in any of these stories, that's one of the things that keeps me interested.
Well, yeah, you know what? I find out all the game wardens in Wyoming think I write about them. But there's only been a couple of the stories that actually are real Wyoming game warden stories. The Nowhere to Run, that book about the two crazy twin brothers way up above the tree line, that was based on a real Wyoming game warden story. But most of them are just sort of the type. The characters are the type of game wardens as opposed to strictly based on a real one.
These game wardens that you don't discourage them from thinking that you're not writing about.
No, because they give me good stuff, but I've not met any of them who don't like the books because I try to keep them authentic, and I have a couple game wardens who I always send the manuscript to make sure I got the procedure stuff right, because they'll tell me otherwise,
So Robert, ask Joe about fishing. His particular passion.
You're a passionate fisherman?
I am. I'm a fly fisherman. Yeah, that's.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I try to go out as much as I can in the summer for trout. And where I live, there's a great river right there that I try to fish and float and wade on. And then once or twice a year, I'll go to some place and do saltwater fly fishing for big, crazy fish too. But that's the thing I'm passionate about more so than hunting, actually.
You and Keith McCafferty hang out together.
I hang out with Keith. We've never fished together, but he sends me flies that he makes, which is great. And I love it.
McCafferty is another mystery writer, if you're not familiar with his work, and he writes about
He's very good.
the Montana wilderness. I'm gonna hand Barbara the mic.
And I'll just, you're fine, no reason to get up. I don't have a date yet for CJ.
Yeah, that's the other guy.
Who's that second last line? Right. CJ coming back in August, but since every one of his books he has been here to autograph it, I'm sure, and talk to you, I'm sure that we will come up with a date. Do you remember the publication date? Because I didn't look it up.
I think it's August 19th.
Okay, so somewhere in that.
I love to come back here in August.
Great fishing, right? Yeah. Anyway, we're not going to break our record, so I'm sure that he will return to us then, which would be absolutely wonderful. And Robert, I am delighted that the Republic is still supporting investigative journalists, although we should all be nervous that Gannett is going to sell itself out one of these days. And so my dream for Robert is that he will become a crime novelist, which he's working on, and God knows he's got great material, right? So should be absolutely wonderful. We've come to the moment where I'd like to give away a couple of books to thank all of you for coming. So the first one I have is by Ann Hillerman, who will be here to sign her 5th book in the universe of her father, Tony, a Lee Pornchie and Manuelita novel on April the 10th. How many of you have been to the Hubble Trading Post? Yay. Okay, so that is a part of this book, which I find really interesting. So we didn't give out numbers, right, Patrick? No. So is anyone here from New Mexico? Oh, I see a hand. Was that a hand? Are you the people who moved here from Corpus Christi so you didn't have to commute? Las Cruces, I'm sorry. You know, you guys deserve it. This lovely couple got so tired of driving from Las Cruces to Scottsdale for our events, they moved here. I am totally serious. So, I think that somebody from New Mexico with that degree of dedication should get The Tale Teller, which is the 5th book. So check with me and we will give it to you. The other book, Patrick and I have been talking about the fact that there are so many books, that are so much alike that it's getting hard to find something we find really original. CJ and I were talking at dinner about the #1 bestseller that's been hanging on forever called Where the Crawdads Sing. That's the right title. I had to talk his publisher into sending that author here last August. I really liked the book, and I said it's too many books for her to sign as a brand new author if we just dump them on her doorstep. So they finally agreed to send her here. Turned out well, didn't it? For those of you who bought one of those 200 copies, congratulations to you, because it's really good. This one, Confessions of an Innocent Man, Patrick is going to do an event with him on April 15th. And I think, once again, it's a really original book. It is published by your publisher, who is very good at publishing original books, like Open Season, for example. And this is a book about a man who has done time for a murder he didn't commit, and when he comes out, he kidnaps 2 of the people responsible and puts them in a silo in the middle of Kansas and sets a clock so they can serve the same number of days in prison that he served. But what's really remarkable about this book is that it is the most beautiful love story, because it is the man's wife who is killed, and he really loved her. And the book goes on. I mean, it's really amazing. Have you read it yet, Patrick?
Not yet.
You're going to, right? Or I'm going to do the event one way or the other. Right? Seriously, it's not that easy to find a truly original voice and an original idea in the 300 and some books that I look at every single month. But this one is one, and it will be here in April. Now, I haven't figured out a good mechanism for giving this away. Do you have an idea?
Who came the farthest?
Who came the farthest? Okay, so who's here from out of state? Well, I see hands, but.
Canada.
Oh, Kansas. I heard Kansas.
Canada.
Okay. Oh, Canada? Wait, but if you're here from Canada, are you living here or you just came for this event?
Came for this event.
They're snowbirds.
Seriously? Okay. All right. Well, you win then, because it is. I say that because we have Canadians who are here for 5 months and 29 days, right? Then they go back to Canada. But you actually came down here just to see CJ?
Well, once we found out that he was going to be here, yeah.
You're waffling. Well, okay, Canada still wins, but nevertheless, you from Kansas, will you still be here in April?
We will not.
Bummer.
I know, you said Kansas, I thought, hey, it's perfect.
You're right. When are you leaving?
Wednesday.
So you probably can't read this by Wednesday, can you? So we can give your copy, because he has one too, to these people, right? Probably not. How long will you be here, sir?
We'll be here till the end of spring training.
Splendid. In that case, Patrick can give you, if you come to the store, his copy, and I can give this copy to the people from Kansas. Is that a great decision? Right. Okay. So that's what we will do. Will you make a point of stopping in the store before you leave? And Patrick, this now puts pressure on you to actually read this book, right? Sorry. Or I'll get another copy from the publisher. In any case, I want to thank you all for coming tonight, because without you, CJ and I would still be drinking Manhattans. And no, seriously, it is so much appreciated by all of us that you have come tonight. Thank you very much. Please give our author and Robert a round of applause. So there are still books for sale up there.